Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As you all enter our Zoom space and get ready, we're going to begin the presentation in just a moment. So thank you, everyone, for registering and joining us today for this presentation. We see hundreds of people joining in. We had about 1,000 people registered. And so as you're all entering the event today, just thank you for your presence and for being here. And we'll get started in just a moment. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started today. Today we're talking about a really important topic, becoming an anti-racist workplace. The word and term anti-racism has been in our vernacular for a few years now, but really higher in profile for the past year. And what we're hoping to get across to you is not only what that means, but also how workplaces can become an anti-racist workplace. So thank you for joining us today. We're going to get into a few housekeeping items. So all of you are on mute that are joining us today through the duration of the presentation. If you have a technical issue with your audio or video, please use the chat function on your Zoom toolbar. And if you have specific questions for our keynote speaker or our panelists, which will be coming up with, I'll give you the agenda in just a moment, we're going to ask you to put those in the Q&A box. And so that way, if more than one person has the same question, you can use the thumbs up feature on the Q&A box to rank people's questions and move them up in the hierarchy so that you don't have to type the exact same question as someone else. We are recording today's webinar, and a link to the recording will be shared with everyone who registered, both you participating as well as anyone that registered. And we want to make sure you understand that there's a survey at the end of this webinar. As you close out, you'll be moved to a survey to give your feedback. And very important point here, and I'll make it again for all of you expecting and getting CHES credits or other continuing education credits for today's webinar, you need to fill out the survey in order to be able to get those CHES credits. So I know there's always a lot of questions about that. So look for the link that's going to come up at the end of the webinar. And I'll tell our technical team, if we can leave the meeting open for a little bit as people are ending it, I think that's one way that we'll make sure that everybody has the link to take that survey. So let's make sure we keep the room open for a few minutes after the hour. And I want to make this last point here about housekeeping. We completely encourage and welcome differing perspectives today, but we do not tolerate any hate speech or bullying in our question and answer section or in our chats. And as an entity, we reserve the right to move any participant from this event if their talking points are not in line with these code of ethics, code of conduct of being respectful of everyone today. A little bit about who we are. HealthLinks is a mentoring program centered at the Center for Health, Work, and Environment at the Colorado School of Public Health. And we are one of 6 centers of excellence that focuses on total worker health, the integration of workplace health and safety. We are based in the Colorado School of Public Health on the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. Research, science, and evidence-based practices inform everything we do. So we thank you for joining us today. You'll learn more about our program in the resources that are sent after today's webinar as well. So as far as an agenda, pretty simple agenda here. I'm going to briefly soon introduce our keynote speaker, who's going to provide some context for us on today's discussion. And then we have a full list of panelists as well, representing employers that will talk about how they're carrying out and carrying forward being an anti-racist workplace. And you will have an opportunity at the end of the panelists and the keynote presentation for a question and answer section with all of our speakers. That's usually a pretty dynamic present part of the presentation. So be thinking about what your questions are for our keynote speaker and the panelists as they're speaking. And once again, please use the Q&A box for entering your questions. Chat is where you'll say hello or give technical issues. Q&A is where you'll place the questions for our presenters and panelists. And you can use the thumbs up on Q&A to rank questions and move them up the hierarchy as well. We do have a co-sponsor for today's webinar. I want to thank Tri-County Health Department. Tri-County has been a partner with us for almost 10 years now in terms of talking about occupational health and safety. And we just greatly appreciate all of the work that you do in workplace wellness, in workplace health and safety, and also for being a partner to talk about how organizations and workplaces are investing in JEDI, in justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and being a co-sponsor on today's presentation. So thank you, Tri-County Health Department. And with that, I want to introduce our keynote presenter for today, Reverend Dr. Jamie Washington. He's the president and founder of the Washington Consulting Group, which was named by The Economist as one of the top 10 global diversity consultants in the world. Dr. Washington has served as an educator, an administrator, and a consultant for over 37 years. He serves as an invited instructor in the Harvard Graduate School of Education and the Lancaster Theological Seminary. He's the president and co-founder of the Social Justice Training Institute and a past president of the American College Personnel Association. Dr. Washington lives by the words of one of his favorite songs, sung by the late Mahalia Jackson at the funeral of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, if I can show somebody that he, she, I, or they are traveling wrong, then my living shall not be in vain. So thank you, Jamie, for joining us today. And I'll turn over the screen share to you at this point.
All right. Thank you so much, David. It is indeed a pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. Thank you, Health Links, for this invitation to be in community with 570 some of our closest friends. So I'm delighted that you've decided to take this hour or so to be in conversation with this esteemed panel. And I'm going to go ahead and get us started. One of the challenging things for a Black preacher like myself is to do anything in 15 to 20 minutes. But you know, my training at Howard did teach me or did equip me to do the 10-minute sermon, the 20-minute sermon, and the 40-minute sermon. So I'm going to try to give these remarks in these 15 minutes, and just invite us into the space of becoming an anti-racist workplace, our individual and collective responsibility. I am Jamie Washington. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I am joining you today from the original and unceded homelands of the Piscataway tribal nations here in the Baltimore, Washington region. I invite you, if you would like to, in the chat, just go ahead and share with the community. If you know the homeland, the ancestral land that you are joining us from, just use the chat for that as well. Go ahead and just chat that in as we are in community together. Thank you. Thank you so much, Katie. And thank you, Rachel. Thank you all for just honoring the land. And one of the key and important things as we start this work together today is that land acknowledgements are our best practice in diversity, equity, and anti-racism and decolonization work today. It is important to me that that practice not become performative. This practice not become habit and not true honoring. And so I want to invite you to just take a deep breath as we honor and invite the energy and the spirits of our original and indigenous colleagues, family into the space. With that, I also do a labor acknowledgement, and we honor the labor of those who help to build the institutions and the organizations that we are occupying, many of whom did not have access to the spaces that they helped to create. Many who came voluntarily and many who did not. And so we just want to ground ourselves in that space as we start today, taking a deep breath together. I want to move now into this intentions for our time together. And so what I want to do in my few minutes of remarks is I just want to provide the foundation for a deeper level of authentic engagement as it relates to us creating an anti-racist space. Thank you, Hannah, for putting there in the chat. If folks don't know, they can click on that link and learn more about where they're joining us from. The next thing is to introduce a key concept for success in this work. to consider the importance of preparing for the next round through upgrading our operating systems. And I'm using a technology analogy during our time together today, because as we are navigating through these multiple pandemics at this moment, the importance of technology is something I think that most of us can relate to. The next thing then is to consider the foundation of a common language and common tools for effective engagement. What I want to name, folks, is that part of the work for the next round, part of becoming an anti-racist organization, both individually and collectively, is to at least understand what we're talking about. And it has been my experience that some of the bumps and the misses are because we are not operating with shared language and understanding. So I'll try to get into some of that as we move through our time together today. We've got this wonderful panel who will join us in a little bit, and we'll get to engage around some of the things that I've gotten to share. But please, as was already named, if there's something that I'm saying that is stirring stuff for you, that's creating questions for you, please put those in the question. And you can use the chat to just join and respond and offer resources and so on to each other as we are here together today. I'm going to move right now quickly into the first intention, which is the key concept. The first thing I want to name here in that is this concept of context before content. Context before content. One of the challenges that we face in this work is sometimes folks move to the content too fast. And I often experience folks trying to move to the content of anti-racism without having done the work needed around understanding context. And so again, here's another opportunity for your engagement. Put in the chat, what are the things that are informing your context? What's the stuff that informs your context, right? So if I were to say to you, so what's informing your context right now? What would you say? When I think about context, I think about these big bullets here. So yes, lived experience. Thanks, Jennifer. Yep, very good. The higher education institution that I'm in, educational communities, absolutely contextual. The history and the environment. You all are getting it. And I want you to think about why this matters if we are to become an anti-racist organization, given all of those important pieces and how it looks different given my zip code and given the media and given this notion of social media and given family, friends, and colleagues, how those things look different based upon the context. So I want you to consider these highlighted things. First, you are informing your context. Who are you, particularly in this conversation, by race? What are your intersecting identities? How clear are you about who you are about race? How do you understand racialized dynamics and experiences? What are your relationships, your friendships? What's your race narrative, right? So when you even hear anti-racist, who do you see? Who's included in that, right? Then us and we. I imagine that many of us, some of us on this space have at one point in our careers or lives been an only. And there are dynamics that show up as an only. So if I'm an only, particularly minoritized by race, trying to navigate creating an anti-racist workplace, that's a thing. What's the environment that you're in? What's the location? How is this conversation and this work look different in Minneapolis than it does in Denver? Or look different in LA than it does in Baltimore? Look at different in higher education than it does in corporate or nonprofit or governmental agencies. Understanding the environments and the locations that we're operating in. Understanding the history. What's gone on in this organization around race? Are there still first and only, or there's never been? What's the present day dynamics going on around race? And what's the future hoped for? And so if you've got folks who are in your space talking about wanting it to be more anti-racist, what's the vision for that, right? Time and timing. Sometimes in this work, as we're seeking to become an anti-racist organization, we're not paying attention to how much time we're devoting to intentionally engaging that work and the timing at which we are starting to engage that. Is this a reactionary moment? Is this after a crisis? Is this on May 26th after the murder of George Floyd? When have we started this conversation? And what are the power dynamics that are at play in all of these situations, right? Who's leading the discussion? Who's invited into the discussion? And what's the quality of engagement? Context before content. And so I want you to think about your context as we listen to our panelists and continue our conversation. But I want to highlight a national context as well. And so we've moved through, we are in the midst of and navigating through health pandemic number one, COVID-19. We move into move into pandemic number two, which is this historical pandemic of systemic racism, and that got illuminated through the murdering of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. The uprisings, the returning to work and school in different ways with masks, 6 feet apart. We see this fall, last fall, no justice for Breonna in that her murderers were acquitted. We had a former president just months ago who had named this work, this conversation is anti-American propaganda, and that we should not be talking in these ways. We have a vote, the vote of what I believe is many of our lifetimes, and the results were Biden and President Biden and Vice President Harris. And we take a deep breath and move into 2021. And as we move into 2021, we experience as a collective insurrection, inauguration, and call for impeachment. I talk about that as the 3 I's. We're into the vaccine and all of the racialized implications of the vaccine, the heightened light being shown on anti-Asian hate. And then we move into the Derek Chauvin trial and the guilty verdict. Contextual, this is what we are experiencing as a country and as a world in many ways. How does this context inform our work around anti-racism? And just yesterday, we get the federal approval of Juneteenth. This moment in the context can have lots of us in spaces of celebration, and we finally got enough. Just like we had with President Barack Obama, finally now we're all done with race. And so again, while we celebrate yesterday's victory, we recognize it as a symbol and not as the end of the work that's needing to be done. So with that, I invite you all to take a deep breath. Take a deep breath, just feel what it feels like to be in this conversation and all of the things that are coming up in our context. So I want you to think about these questions. What's up? What has your energy or attention based upon the things that I shared in the context? What's in your headspace? What's in your feeling and emotional space? And that's a particularly important question as we think about and recognize the importance of, we must do this work with a level of emotional intelligence as well as cognitive intelligence. What are you witnessing within your organization? What are you witnessing within your organization that makes this session necessary, that brought you into this space today? And what do you hope to get out of our next half hour or so together? That's where I want you to be, in a reflective space as I share my last comments. Here they are. I want you to think about technology, and I use imagery because how many of you remember cassette tapes and CD players and floppy disk and all those things? All of these were cutting edge technologies at a particular time. Some of us still have VCRs with nothing to play on them. Some of us still have VCR tapes with no place to play them. But these were really important things. I remember when I got mine. But I'm using this because if we were trying to do our work today using these technologies, we would be left behind. We'd be getting spinning wheels. We'd be getting all these, our systems don't work. And my experience is that lots of folks are trying to do anti-racism work with old technologies. And we need to upgrade our technologies. Folks will say, what do you mean old technologies, Jamie? Here are some old race mindsets, old race technologies, old race operating systems. I don't see color. I just see people as people. Let's treat everybody equal and everybody be the same. We are the world. We are the children. That, I believe, is one of the pieces that has us want to just remain everybody be nice and comfortable. Nobody wants to be uncomfortable, particularly as we talk about dominant group members. America's a melting pot. It's not a melting pot, but a salad bowl. This framing has us let people keep their flavors, but not. So we saw that as progress, right? Because it was first we melted in. Now we're going to keep our flavors and our textures, but we're not considering the bowl that we're in and the container that we have to operate in. And do we have to be cut up in order to even fit in to the container? Multiculturalism, learning about the minoritized other, beyond tolerance towards acceptance. So who's doing the accepting into whose culture? The myth of meritocracy, and all you need to do is pull yourself up by your bootstraps. This I'm a minoritized person from another identity, so I get race. So because I'm minoritized by class or by gender identity or by sexual orientation or by ability, I don't need to talk about race. I understand oppression. And finally there, I'm connected to BIPOC folks. My cousin, my aunt, my friend, my best friends are. And as a result, I really understand race. So what happens in this space is there is the confusion of proximity with capacity. Just because I'm near doesn't mean I have the capacity to build anti-racist organizations. And so what I'm offering in my last words is that what we need to do is upgrade our systems. We must upgrade our systems. And here are the things I want to offer in terms of upgrading. We must create a safe and brave learning environment. So as we're doing this work, we can't expect that everybody's on the same page. I want to make sure that as you hear me say safe and brave, that we're not conflating safe and comfortable. Right? So often I hear people say safe and they think we mean comfortable. And that comfort is often of the majoritized, the privileged group, particularly in this context around race, whiteness. A common language and clear understanding of terms. What do you mean by race? What do you mean by anti-racism? What do you mean by systemic racism? We must have some clear definitions on engaging that. We must be able to build our capacities to experience the full range of emotions. So there's a lot of tone policing that happens in this context, so that minoritized folks are only supposed to show up in ways that predominantly white folks feel comfortable. So if I'm in pain, if I'm in fear, if I'm in rage, if I'm in anger, that there's not a lot of space for the full human experience. The DEI, the focus on DEI must not excuse us from engaging the dynamics of race and racism at the individual, group, and the systems levels. One of the things that happens so often in the work that values all lives matter, in the work that values injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and I absolutely hold that value. For many, it has been an excuse not to engage race. And so we can't do diversity, equity, and inclusion work in the workplace. We cannot create an anti-racist organization if we won't do race. Identities do matter, and you must do your own work. And that is all of us. I tell folks all the time, I've been Black all my life, far as I know. But just because I've been Black didn't mean I knew what it meant to be Black and how Blackness showed up within organizations for me. And so consider the terms: race, racism, systemic, individual, microaggressions, implicit bias, white supremacy, whiteness, white privilege, white fragility, anti-racist, and anti-Blackness. Terms of engagement. How do we talk about those in our workplaces? And finally, Dr. Eben Kendi says it in this way: Anti-racist includes beliefs, actions, movements, and policies adopted or developed to oppose racism. It is more than simply not being actively or consciously practicing racism. It is with intention deliberately challenging oneself and others to eradicate, examine, eradicate racist policies, procedures, and practices that are embedded in our cultures and institutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you so much. Questions that come up, as a reminder, please put them in the Q&A. I'm going to quickly introduce our three panelists and let them tell you where they're from and how they're putting anti-racism into place in their workplace. I'm going to introduce all three of them and then call them out in order to give a few minutes talking. And once again, thank you so much, Jamie, for your keynote presentation and your remarks today. So we've got a really esteemed panel today. I'm really excited to announce our panelists. So first off is Sierra Gillison. Sierra serves as the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at Lyra Health. And before joining Lyra, she served as an assistant director for student life at Stanford's Graduate School of Business. Sierra joined Stanford University in 2017, where she led the education and equity team and supported faculty and residents in residential education. Sierra is a trained student affairs professional, and she specializes in using design thinking for building creative learning experiences. She is also a small business owner of Believe in the Journey, LLC, which centers on international education as an exceptional opportunity to engage, learn, and grow across differences. Thank you, Sierra, for joining us today. We also have Dr. Milo Dodson. Milo is a licensed psychologist, and he serves as Senior Manager for Diversity and Inclusion and Community Outreach for Belkin International. Dr. Dodson is a committed advocate for service-based leadership, directing hip hop artist Common's Dreamers and Believers Summer Youth Camp for 6 years, and volunteering for both Colin Kaepernick's Know Your Rights Camp and Kenny Still's Still Growing Summit. Dr. Dodson's unique pedigree as a counseling psychologist informs his empowering approach for improving companies' diversity, equity, and inclusion communities. And also on our panel today is Corey Pauling. At TIAA since 2006, Corey Pauling became the organization's Senior Vice President, Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer, and Head of Corporate Social Responsibility in 2018. Corey was instrumental in the launch of the Inclusion and Diversity function at TIAA over 12 years ago, and served as a primary legal and business advisor and thought leader in this area. She also leads TIAA's Enterprise Corporate Social Responsibility function, which led over 230 volunteer projects, 10,000 employee volunteers, and $11 million in corporate and workforce giving globally, including progressive pandemic outreach initiatives in 2020. Through her groundbreaking leadership and strong enterprise collaborations, TIAA has achieved powerful indicators of workforce and business innovation through inclusion and diversity and corporate social responsibility strategies. And the organization has garnered lauded employer of choice recognition by renowned organizations such as Diversity Inc. and Forbes and others. So thank you, panelists, for joining today. I'm going to start off with Sierra. Sierra, please tell us a little bit about where you're from, who you're representing, and what you want to tell us about anti-racism.
For sure. Thank you, David. And hello to everyone. I first want to say thank you to Jamie. I don't know if you remember this, but we had a wonderful experience together in my Social Justice Training Institute experience. And a lot of what happened in that space was me coming to terms with my Blackness. So seeing you and hearing you talk about this in this space coming full circle in my career has meant everything to me. So a little bit about me. Sierra, I use she, they pronouns. I'm at Lyra Health. And so at Lyra Health, I serve as the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. And one of the interesting things about how we've been thinking about anti-racism is knowledge. So a lot of what I heard Jamie talking about is you can't attack a problem if you don't actually know what problem you're trying to attack. And so I think a lot of what I saw HealthLinks propose in this conversation is needing of shared language. You have organizations that are making statements, doing blackout marks on their social media pages, and their employees don't understand what any of it means. And so what I found is a lot of times people were spending a lot of their energy and efforts in marketing and campaigning to make sure that externally people knew that their company meant well. But a lot of what was not happening was the conversations with the employees. They didn't understand like what the statement meant. We put out an anti-racism statement. Do we all know what that means? And so my biggest part of my strategy in coming to LIRA has been, let's get shared language. What does DEIB mean at LIRA? You see a variety of different language and usage of what these terms mean in different spaces, but let's make sure we know what it means at LIRA. And then with that, if we are an anti-racist company, which we are, and we're in the business of opposing racism, what does that look like? What does the beginning of that work look like in the context of who we are as a mental health company? So happy to answer any questions, but that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Sierra. Thank you much for joining us today. A reminder to everyone participating today to put any questions you have for our panelists and for Jamie in the Q&A section. I see some questions already coming in. You can also vote with a thumbs up if there's questions that come up that are similar to the ones you want to ask. We're going to switch over to Milo. Dr. Dotson, thank you for joining us today. Please introduce yourself.
All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where and when you are watching. Dr. Milo, pronouns are him, he, and his. And I have the honor of being at Belkin for the last 4 months, so pretty new position for me. So as you may know, Belkin International is in the tech space. And in terms of the size of our company, we're about 1,400, I believe. So again, in terms of what I want to be able to share today, kind of really breaking down, as we've heard different definitions of anti-racism, not just avoiding racism, but actively pursuing and deconstructing, exploring our biases and acknowledging those. And then, ultimately putting that action into place to create an equitable society. So similar to what Sierra was saying at Belkin, what I really wanted us to be able to focus on is creating definitions for each of the DEIB components. So for diversity, we define that as representation, equity is opportunity, I, inclusion is engagement, and then B, belonging is well-being. And not just in a physical health sense, but also as a psychologist, obviously, I'm going to point out the importance of mental health in the workplace. So to kind of round this out, what I also want to be able to share are the 5 DEIB commitments that we've been able to put into place. So we first really want to start off by highlighting and upholding a shared responsibility of DEIB for everyone. It's not just me and my role, and it's not just me as a Black man in America, but this is something that everybody within the company has an investment in and should continue to explore in their own personal journeys. We also really want to create a level of education and awareness as lifelong learners. So what I've found, both in my clinical work as well as when I've been doing external consultation, a lot of people feel like this is a place or this is a destination that we get to, and they feel like they have to hurry up and get there and run. But when we can kind of slow down and understand that we're lifelong learners, that opens up the space and kind of eases us into it. That being said, we also really need to have a level of cultural humility, which some of us may know as a term from the social justice work, as well as the psychology work and research, to make sure that in all of our interactions and all of our relationship building, we're really approaching them with a sense of cultural humility as we're moving to the 4th here of active listening in all of our courageous conversations. And then, ultimately creating a place to champion accountability. And what I mean by accountability is not just in our relationships, not just in our programming, but also in our policies. So if we're talking about things and we have this bucket of programming, does this bucket also align with our policies that we have in place? And making sure that those are equitable and inclusive to obviously and honestly create a healthy workplace. So I'm really excited to be here with you all. Excited to learn with everybody as well, and open to questions later for sure.
Thank you, Milo. And rounding out our panel today, where I'm going to switch things over to Corey Pauling. Corey, tell us a little bit about TIAA and how you are putting anti-racism into practice at your workplace.
Sure. Well, I thought the first question I was answering is where am I from? And I was pretty excited to be able to share that I'm from Detroit, Michigan, the east side of Detroit, Michigan. And will always be a Detroiter in my heart because it is my constitution in the sense of how I actually see the world and what I think I bring to inclusion, diversity, equity, and corporate social responsibility. I grew up in the majority in Detroit. Detroit is a largely African-American city. I grew up with the experience of the constant affirmation that comes from being in a space that says you are enough, you are smart, you are deserved, you are beautiful, you are liked. It is a constant validation that comes from growing up in the majority that I do think is part of what I encounter in the work that I do every day in trying to help people think about inclusion, equity, belonging, diversity, bias, all the things that we're going to be talking about today. I come at it from a place of understanding, not a place of justification, but a place of understanding why some people do have blind spots on the less intentional side of the spectrum. And for those who are at the other end of the spectrum, that's a different discussion. But fundamentally, I think that how you are affirmed and how you're validated does sort of create a universe from which you have to challenge yourself to try to see things differently and understand different experiences and perspectives. So I first wanted to offer today, I felt it in my heart to answer the from question because I love getting a chance to say I'm from Detroit. Any opportunity that would permit. And I see there's some Detroiters on the chat line. I grew up on Mack and Helen Street. So at TIAA, I get there by way of of course, where I grew up and the University of Michigan. I was actually an engineer there and did some consulting, then went to law school and been at TIAA for 15 years. As an employment lawyer and then stepping into this space, having helped launch it in 2008, having stepped into this space now 3 years ago, amazingly, I can't believe it's been that long. Passionate about this work because this work is necessary. The last year and a half has established that, no question. I would never wish last year on anyone and no one could have predicted it. We were all looking forward to the start of a new decade and 2020 and great things. And 2020 came and we had no idea. But I will tell you the silver lining of what this unearthed for the work that we do every day and how we do it and the voice that it's enabled really is breaking ground. And I'm coming at this from a very positive standpoint that I think we are making progress. Certainly not over, certainly opportunities exist and certainly overt bias exists. We know that. But I think that the platform for this work has been lifted by the circumstances that this universe experienced last year. And I think we are in a place where we can't go back. And I think the accountability that is associated with the promises and the values that were espoused means that there will be expectations that we deliver. So at TIAA last year, what I would mention as we get started is our launch of the Be the Change program. I shouldn't say program, our Be the Change platform, which is simple in message, but strong in challenge in the sense that it is a message to TIAA as a global company to do something. And it's also a challenge to our leaders to do something. And it's a challenge to our workforce overall to do something in times that are big and macro, but also in situations where it's you and an email or it's you on a Zoom call and how you can approach an opportunity to be inclusive and what are you going to do? Very quickly, our platform is premised on four pillars. We focus on building awareness and understanding. So owning that you don't know everything, even if you are, to the reference point of just because you're in one group doesn't mean you get it for all groups. And I think I know I vulnerably learned that this year with our AAPI community. There's a lot of things I just don't know. And then there's the whole thing of people wanting to compare. Well, my troubles are better or worse than your troubles, and that whole thing. But just getting to a place of understanding, owning a desire to and a need to get educated, study. Secondly, dialogue. We have, like many organizations, engaged in levels of dialogue unheard of, unprecedented, with people sharing things that just were not talked about in corporate America, and we are doing it now, and I'm delighted about that. Leadership. So the third pillar being leadership for us, because TI prides itself humbly on the fact that as an organization, we really were established on the principle of inclusion, financial inclusion. And I'll talk a little bit about our organization's legacy. But the idea was that financial inclusion and wellness should not be limited to the wealthy. And so our organization in 1918 was founded for financial inclusion for educators. And now it's grown in leaps and bounds. But that principle, that legacy is there. And so leadership for us is the question of how can we lead in this space? What difference are we going to make? And then lastly, action. Everything is words until you do something. And in fact, once you give words to things and don't do anything, it actually is worse. So we know that we have to look both internally and externally. So not just pointing fingers and saying what everybody else needs to be working on. We needed to shine a light on what we knew our gaps are in our organization and to do something about them. And so under great CEOs, Roger Ferguson, our outgoing retiring CEO as of May, and our new CEO, Tashonda Brown Duckett, we got great runway to continue with this work. And I couldn't be more excited about the path forward. I feel very blessed to do the work that I do. It's a testament to a lot of things about me, but going back to where I started, it really is, it's Detroit and being able to make a real impact on a much broader scale than I could have imagined. So thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Corey. Lots of really great questions coming in the Q&A, and I appreciate people voting them up the scale. We never get to everyone's question. So let me just preface that. We're going to do our best to moderate this. Jamie, do you feel comfortable moderating some of the questions that have come in?
I do, and I just want to hang out with this panel. And I know we only have about 12 minutes, but I'm going to do our best to keep us moving along. So let me just go, thank you, David. Let me just go to the first person who put a question in, and it says, my experience has been that they're hateful people, under this discussion will not change their viewpoints no matter what the circumstances, right? So in our organization, we got folks who people feel like are hunkered down in continuing to operate in ways that maintain status quo. How do we get around this, and how do we reach these people? What's your thoughts around how do we get around, how do we reach the people who don't seem reachable? Yeah. So anybody can just jump in there. What's your take?
Yeah, I will jump.
Got to answer all of them. So yeah.
I'll jump in, and I'm going to be brief because I know we don't have a lot of time. Two things come to mind for me. One is that we are in a space where, unlike I think in years past and circumstances past, there was at least a foundational set of facts, realities that we all accepted. We are now in a space where I could say the sky is not blue, the sky is pink, and no, it's not, and have no basis for it other than I just don't want to say it's blue. And when you don't have that fundamental sort of agreement on these are the rules or these are the sort of parameters, and people can just dismiss things because they don't like it, then you are in a very vulnerable place because you are not necessarily dealing with reason and reasonableness. And I hope that within organizations, particularly where people work, while they might want to say, no, the sky is not blue, the sky is whatever color I want it to be, because they're at work, there usually is just at least a little bit more of an ear toward, I this is helping me pay my mortgage. So I have to think about this. I have to at least participate. I have to at least be challenged a little bit. Just the outright rejection that we see and that we've seen on the news and all the things that we've been seeing, I think in a corporate setting, or even in an institutional setting, there is probably a little bit more of a door that's open for the person to have to participate or at least listen on some level. And I actually come at this from a place of positivity in the sense that I do think that in ID&E, there is a place where everybody relates to something. It may not be race, but if you can get to the idea of inequity for something, that everything isn't a meritocracy in some respect. Maybe somebody has an LGBTQ plus cousin, maybe they have a transgender daughter, or whatever they can relate to that helps challenge this concept of ultimate equity and equality for everybody, which we know is a farce. If you can just get a point of connection around that relatability, from that, I think is an opportunity to then expand it. And for many, I also lead CSR for TIAA. For many, it's easier for them to think about diversity and inclusion from the standpoint of community engagement. They'll be willing to go to the soup kitchen and serve food to homeless people, or they'll be willing to give to, for water rights in some country somewhere. That, their detachment from that but even that can be used to create a conversation about the need and how there are huge inequities and inequalities that can persist. But once you find that opening, that relatability, or that ear, then I think that's your opportunity. And I do think you can connect. You can't spend all your time trying to reach those folks, but there are those windows and you do have to try to engage.
Thank you. I appreciate that because you name again, finding the window in, so finding their place of pain. You also enter at around helping folks understand that in the workplace, right? And so this is what I always say in terms of employees, right? So you have the right to feel and believe what you feel. I cannot make that wrong. What I can make it is out of alignment. That is not in alignment with where we are. And because you signed a contract, i.e. take the paycheck, you must operate within alignment of the organization, right? So I'm not making your beliefs or values wrong. They're not in alignment with this space. So this is not going to be a good space for you, right? And so helping folks to get that distinction. But again, from that space of seeking to help them to find a way in. Very powerful. I appreciate it. I'm going to go to one of the next questions. What recommendations do you have for meaningful, tangible, and measurable ways to incorporate anti-racist work into the workplace? So what are some beyond diversity statements and beyond proclamations, any thoughts around meaningful, again, tangible and measurable ways? Dr. Milo or Sierra, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I can jump in. I think first I think of one of our focus pillars is connection and collaboration. So it's a process of not just learning as individuals, but learning in community, and communal learning is actually more powerful and more potent for long-term change than just learning in our own silos. And then I think the other piece is that as we're connecting with this education and awareness, that's going to allow for more meaningful, a meaningful connection to some of the programming and some of the policies that companies can create. The last thing I'll share, as it kind of relates to the first piece, is something that I've learned is that if you listen to somebody for long enough, you'll be able to hear what they need. And if you listen for even longer, you'll be able to hear how you can help them with what they need. So if we're really trying to create meaningful change, we actually have to start by first listening and meeting people where they are, to then continue with the education, awareness, programming, and policy change.
Very powerful. Sierra.
And I would say to that point, like the hard part about this work is how do you measure it, right? Like what does success look like when you're talking about listening? So one of the things that I'm doing at Lyra, right, is we started this series called Intentional Conversations. And the intentional conversations are topics that are driven by employees to say, like, this is something that's coming up in either my one-on-ones with my manager, or I'm feeling macro or microaggressed in these ways, and I feel like we need to be able to talk about it. And I don't feel comfortable bringing it up on my own, but I want to leverage the community as a space to talk about what's coming up. And so what I said to myself and my team is, okay, we need to create this program, but what will success look like? Is it the number of participants? Is it the number of programs that happen per year? Is it frequency? And so I would say determine for your organization what makes the most sense in terms of the metric. For us, it was frequency, because what we had is a group of people that were regularly wanting to meet, and there was no space to do that. So I set the goal of hosting 11 intentional conversations over the course of a calendar year. That my calendar month is the monthliest, the pace for me. And so the metric for me when I'm talking with our CEO is saying, like, I've hosted X amount of programs over the course of a calendar year with this percentage of employees engaging in the programs. What I'm also paying attention to is the trajectory of the participation. Is it maintaining consistency? Are people continuing to come to the program, or are we seeing different topics have more interest than others? And how far in advance do I need to send a calendar invite to encourage the participation? So these are the types of things that I've done with our CEO to engage, like, okay, we want to have a program about this, but how do we make it measurable and speak the language that also speaks to the organization?
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. This whole, were you trying to come in there, Corey?
Yeah, I was just going to say three very quick things, bullet point. I would add three things: making inclusive behaviors a performance standard for performance reviews. Secondly, building in inclusive leadership success as a skill set for a job recs, so that you're evaluating against someone's work in this space or not in determining who's a qualified candidate. And third, to add on to Sierra's points, metrics related to how you can measure inclusion. In our organization, we have an inclusion index. We're working on an equity index. And we do a whole bunch of analytics. I say we lead with data. So you really have to invest in metrics so that you can do reporting. So would offer those.
Absolutely. All three of those responses were so right on point. And one of the dilemmas that I think that we fall into in terms of this notion of, so how do we measure success? Again, there's often, so what do you people want? What's going to be enough? You got Juneteenth. Come on now. He did not get acquitted. He is going to jail, just all the stuff. So how do we measure success? Are we going to be finished with this at any point? Right. And what I like to say is we have to get clear about the vision, right? So you can't measure things against nothing, right? And so if this mattered, in 5 years, we would see this, more of this, less of this, we would have learned this, we would be engaging in this way. So there has to be a space of vision. And one of the challenges is that we often show up in just just naming problems, identifying problems, without what does liberation look like? What does anti-racism look like? And so all of the things that are being named here are multiple ways to engage measuring success, but it does require vision, right? And leadership connected to that. We are at the end of our time together, and I just want to thank this panelist for your energy, for the work that you're doing out there, for this opportunity to be with you. And what I want to leave us with is that this is long haul work, right? And so I often will say that there are no quick fixes. We must acknowledge, celebrate, and appreciate the progress. When we say nothing has changed, you dishonor my grandmother. You dishonor the labor of those who died so that we could even be in this space. And so, yes, there is work to be done, but acknowledge, celebrate, and appreciate progress, and take care of yourselves. Thanks so much. We hand it back to David. And thank you all for joining us today.
What an amazing discussion and panel. There are so many comments coming in, as you probably can see, that we need to do a part 2 already. This should have been an hour and a half, 2 hours long. We need to do a 10-part series. I completely agree with those sentiments. We will take that information and bring it back to our co-sponsors, to the leadership, at our organization. So know that your sentiments here will be brought forward and used in terms of future programming. I want to thank once again, Tri-County Health Department, who's been a partner and a sponsor of our work on workplace health and safety for the better part of the last decade. I want to thank and appreciate Dr. Jamie Washington and our panelists, Dr. Dodson, Corey Pauling, and Sierra Gillison for this really important and meaningful conversation. And for being so on time. This will be the most timely presentation we've had. So you all really, you get your kudos on from an administrative and logistics standpoint as well. So thank you for doing that. All of you will receive the recording of today's webinar through our follow-up. Jamie, can I ask, are your slides available? Is that something?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So we'll make sure that we send with Jamie's slides along with the recording of today's webinar as well. Our next webinar, we're taking a little bit of a break through the summer, but it's going to be in September, on the 22nd of September. And we're going to be talking about this, another very timely conversation, which is about paid family and medical leave and its impact in the workplace. Where the time is now is what we're calling that. And we're getting together a national and local representative of speakers. For those of you in Colorado, you know that recently we passed paid family and medical leave. So you will get the link to register for this webinar as well. Paid family and medical leave for all is coming up on September 22nd. Thank you everyone for joining us today. As you exit out of the webinar, please make sure to take the survey that you're automatically linked to. We'll leave this room open for a little bit for people to, as they exit, get to the link where the survey is, because taking that survey is going to give us the feedback we need on this presentation, as well as how to inform future talks, as well as for you to get the continuing education credits. And I know there's a lot of CHES people in our audience that you can get your certified health educator credits as well. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you for the robust discussion. We'll leave the room open for a few more moments, and just really appreciate everybody's perspective today and the amount of sort of at the organizational and high-end level of the presentation and the questions. So thank you.
You're welcome. Hey, Sierra. Mwah, mwah, mwah. Good to see you again. Thank you so much, Corey and Milo.
Man, thank you for taking us to church on a Wednesday.
Again, always.
My goodness. I'm like, hold on, man. Is this Sunday already? Like the pandemic is messing with my sense of time here, but is it Sunday?
Thank you all. Thank you.
Here sipping my coffee and